we're talking about the largest union in the state of Washington, the Washington Education Association, and how its pockets are being padded by the political party in power. So I want to start with where this started for us. So last week we talked about a few line items that Doge Washington, the citizen sleuth volunteers, had dug up in pages of state spending that seemed problematic. And one of them was $8.6 million to the Washington Education Association. And on its face, if that's where this ended, it's still bad. As we discussed last week, $8.6 million to the state's largest teachers union, which isn't hurting for money. They have millions of dollars coming in without the help of taxpayers, not to mention that the bulk of what the WEA does is engage in political conduct. They donate to virtually every Democratic politician in this state, you name it. Bob Ferguson, Chris Reykdal, Democratic lawmakers. They've pushed back, used their money to push back against conservative causes like initiatives, for instance. So it just seems weird that a union that supports Democratic politicians is then, it's like a big cycle, right? Is then getting money back, taxpayer money back, and funneled to them by Democrats in Olympia. And then that money goes through and they send it back out to Democratic lawmakers. Democratic lawmakers give them money and the cycle continues. So again, if the 8.6, and I think we could have easily left it there, right? $8.6 million to the WEA, that just doesn't seem right. They shouldn't be getting $1 of taxpayer money. But the truth is actually much worse than that. And the amount of money we're talking about here is much worse than that, to the tune of potentially $70 million. And again, credit to citizen sleuths who started to dive deeper into that $8.6 million figure, flagged it for us, and who helped us navigate and walk through where that money went, where that money originated, and how that initial investment from the state of Washington to the WEA is now ballooning with little to no accountability for the funds. So let's dive into it. In truth, the $8.6 million or so that we talked about is something that was pretty public at the time if you follow news closely. So there was an article this time last year in Education Week. The headline of that article: teachers' unions are starting teacher prep programs. Here's what to know. So this is an article from a national publication talking about teachers' union, school prep programs. Well, if you read that article, you'd know that the teachers' union that they were referring to and that the article is written about is the Washington Education Association. Let me read a little bit from this May 16th, 2024 article. Teachers' unions, long defenders of the teaching profession, are now putting their own spin on an often criticized component: teacher preparation. The Washington Education Association is in its first year of overseeing a teacher residency program in which aspiring teachers receive on-the-job training and a paycheck while they earn their teaching license. It's the first and so far only preparation program in which a union is taking the lead role in credentialing teachers, although other state unions are interested in following suit. And here's the financial component. The WEA received $10.7 million in federal pandemic relief money from the state, with $6.6 million of it allocated for the union to build and launch a teacher residency program. The first cohort of residents started last year and will graduate in August with their teaching certificate with a special education endorsement. So there is setting up where that money is starting to come from. During the pandemic, with COVID relief funds, the state of Washington contracted the Washington Education Association, the teachers union, to start these teaching cohorts, essentially a training program for would-be teachers. So the state, as opposed to OSPI handling it, which you think they would, and which across the country is the case because no other teachers union in the entire nation is being contracted and paid with taxpayer funds to run these teaching cohorts, except now in Washington state. But again, as was problematic with a lot of things that COVID relief money was spent on, states like ours liked it. They liked the money. They liked the programs. Outside entities liked the money that was coming in. and they don't want to get rid of it. I mean, gosh, here we have $10 million or so in COVID relief funds handed to the WEA to start a program to train new teachers. Is that program really just going to stop? Of course not. No one ever intended for it to stop. So it was the cardinal sin of taking one-time monies from COVID and pushing them into a program that you know is going to have to be a continuing expense. And so here's what happened after that. After the COVID money went away, OSPI and the state of Washington and Democrats went in the pockets of taxpayers to continue this program and the funding going to the WEA. So here is the 2024 budget operating request, supplemental operating budget request from OSPI in 2024, where they wanted to continue. Again, the COVID money's not there. So they wanted $7.3 million for fiscal years 2024 and 2025 and $12.1 million for fiscal years 2026 and 2027 to continue the program that was started with COVID relief funds being given to the WEA. So they requested this money. We want to continue to offer professional development and career support and guidance to 15,000 substitute teachers currently serving in Washington's classrooms. So they're asking for about $21 million. And then, of course, Democrats are in control of the budget. The Washington Education Association owns Democrats. So, of course, in their final 2023-2025 operating budget, they have line items in there to grant millions of dollars in funding to this approved educator preparation program run by a statewide labor organization representing educators to fund cohorts of teacher residents. Gee, so there is written into the budget a line item giving millions of dollars to a program that just has to be run by a statewide labor organization representing educators. There's only one of them, right? So by state law and in the state budget, this has to continue to be run by a statewide labor organization representing educators, the Washington Education Association. So keep following this because it's going to get much worse. So again, you have the initial $10 million or so. Let's do something that's not being done anywhere else. And let's have the teachers union run the training programs and the cohorts. Let's do that here with COVID relief funds, knowing that if we're going to ask them to use this money to set up a training program, we're going to have to go to taxpayers to continue that program in the future, which is what OSPI and Kruse did in that 2024 supplemental operating budget request that was granted by Democrats in Olympia, specifically to be given to a statewide labor organization representing educators, of which there is only one. So 2024, the supplemental budget, of course, that's only a temporary situation as well. Millions and millions of dollars to continue the program. So fast forward to our current situation. We're looking at the 2025-2027 operating budget. This is the request from the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction for the budget cycle we're in right now, where, keep in mind, state lawmakers are going to have to figure out how to cut $14 billion or, more likely, increase taxes by $14 billion to cover the massive deficit. Let's look at how much the ask has ballooned from OSPI. Now, for this program, for fiscal year 2026 and 2027, they want $21.5 million. And for fiscal year 2028 and 2029, they want $35 million. What started with $10 million in federal COVID relief given to the state and doled out to the allies of Democrats, the Washington Education Association. Now, in the next 4 years, they want $55 million, most of that funneled directly into the hands of the WEA. And here's what's interesting. To me, maybe the most interesting aspect. Look, if you have a program that's set up, that's incredibly successful, it's doing an important job getting teachers trained up, special educators trained up. Somebody's got to do it. Why not the WEA, right? So here's in the budget recommendation from OSPI, here's what it says. The Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction requests funding to continue state support for a teacher residency apprenticeship program that has proven to be successful, placing over a dozen special education teachers in Washington classrooms following graduation of its first cohort in August of 2024. You heard that correctly. OSPI is now asking over the next 4 years for $55 million to help continue to fund a program that has only so far placed a dozen special education teachers. I don't need to do the math for you. A dozen. It goes on to say, here's the performance outcomes we expect if you give us this money. By funding this request, Washington State will prepare 28 cohorts of special education teacher residence apprentices over the next 4 years, graduating and placing over 400 special education teachers in Washington schools. So first of all, even if they were to place 400, you can only place 400 with $55 million? Not to mention that they haven't proven that they're capable of over 4 years graduating and placing 400 special education students, that are teachers. That would be 100 a year, when so far they've only successfully graduated and placed 12. 12. Can you think of any scenario in the private sector where an investment of $55 million would be made to something that has not really been tested, that has only proven successful 12 times? And they just want us to believe that if you throw this money at it, we'll scale it up and we'll be able to do tenfold what we're doing right now. And what, just assuming? What if you don't have the people who want to participate? What if you don't have 400 individuals over 4 years who want to go through these apprenticeship programs and become special education teachers? Are you going to give the money back, WEA, to the state of Washington? Of course not. There's no line item that says you have to return the money if you don't reach this lofty goal. It's just a number. It's just a number OSPI throws out there saying, hey, we know they've only graduated 12 so far, and one cohort, that's according to OSPI, in this budget ask. But give us 55 mil and they'll place 400, even though we have no barometer whatsoever to tell you whether that's even possible or whether there's even enough people who want to do it. What does it remind you of? It reminds me of Governor Jay Inslee's Right Away initiative, where he said, we're going to go along state highways and we're going to clear all these homeless encampments and we're going to get people out of homelessness. And then when you actually did the math, when you had these $80 million investments and you divided it all up with the number of people that Commerce said on their website were permanently removed from homelessness, it was like $1 million per person to get them out of one of those homeless encampments along a state highway and out of homelessness. And then they don't track it after that, so you don't even know if the person is truly out of homelessness anymore. $1 million a person. Now they're telling us they need $55 million, and that's just for the next 4 years, and it keeps ballooning, so God only knows how much they'll ask for in the next budget cycle, to continue a program that has so far only proven that it can get 12 people out of a teacher training program. This is insane, and it's going to get crazier. So naturally, if this was just really blatantly out there in the open, above and beyond this obscure national website that covers education issues, if they were blatantly saying, OSPI is saying, we want this money to go to the WEA, the teachers union, to administer. They're going to get personally $50 million, whatever it is. Clearly, people are going to start to ask questions, even maybe the legacy media, right? So you've got to bury that. You've got to bury it. And I mentioned earlier in that budgetary language where it said, this money is designated for a statewide union, labor organization, representing teachers. It's like, okay, just say the Washington Education Association. But they don't want to do that. So all throughout this budget ask, this current budget ask, they couch the language. And they don't just come out and say, this is for the Washington Education Association. Just a couple things I pulled out. OSPI initially contracted with a statewide labor organization to pilot the teacher residency apprenticeship. Okay, yeah, the WEA, just say it. It says, OSPI projects the need for a contract with an organization providing a suite of supports and professional development opportunities for emergency substitute teachers. The WEA, just say it. OSPI projects the need for a contract with a residency provider to cover the administration costs. The WEA. Just say it. OSPI is requesting ongoing funding to contract with an organization providing a suite of supports and professional development opportunities. The WEA. Just say it. You know who's getting the money. OSPI projects the need for a contract with an organization providing a suite of supports and professional development opportunities. The WEA. Just say it. You know who's getting the money. But you don't want to say it because you know how corrupt it looks. In fact, in this entire budget request from Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, Kruse, they only mentioned WEA one time. One time. At the very end of the multi-page budget request, it says collateral connections. So you kind of know, is there any intergovernmental connections, legal or administrative mandates, state facility impacts, state workforce impacts. There's a little bullet point that says stakeholder impacts. It says this proposal is supported by the Washington Education Association and the Professional Educator Standards Board. OSPI anticipates broad support from school districts and both statewide and local organizations and associations connected to K-12 education. So in a budget request, think about this for a second. In this budget request, now seeking $55 million, much of that which will be funneled directly to the Washington Education Association. Nowhere in the request does it say that, but they did make sure to say this proposal is supported by the Washington Education Association. Yeah, no shit. I wonder why they support it. It's because it will enrich their union to the tune of tens of millions of dollars so they can continue to fund Democratic political candidates, including Superintendent of Public Instruction Kruse. Corruption. Theft. It's insane stuff. And we're not done. So in these budget requests, right, it's more so black and white in terms of, here's the academic purposes of this, and we need more teachers and all of this stuff. But if you go to the WEA website and actually look at the way that they characterize the WEA ART, Apprenticeship Residency in Teaching program, it is very clear that this is just another one of their ideological DEI initiatives. That this for them in the WEA is all about diversity, equity, inclusion, and not really about getting through as many qualified teaching candidates as possible and getting them into our school district. In fact, at the bottom of the page about this apprenticeship residency and teaching program, it says, who should apply? Individuals committed to social justice, inclusion, and to students with disabilities and who identify with our core values. The core values being diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this now, what has ballooned from a one-time federal COVID relief payment that should have never happened in the first place because it was clear it would have to be a continuation. To fit a specific need the state said it had. We need more educators. We need more special educators. We need to help train substitute teachers. Let's have the WEA take this COVID relief fund and do it. Then ballooned into 20 million. Now balloons into 55 million. And has really just become a way to pad the pocket of the WEA, a way to push their continued obsession over DEI. And even on their own website, I want to play a little video clip for you that talks about the wonderful, wonderful program that they've put together. Even in this video, they acknowledge that this program really is just in the early stages.
It's sort of in its infancy stages right now, but it can be something fantastic that I believe the rest of the country can use, right? But it is a way to help minorities become upwardly mobile as far as where they teach, how they teach, the curriculum, what level they want to teach. Because, again, there aren't a lot of minorities or people of color in these spaces.
Is that the way it's being sold from a budget perspective to lawmakers in the ask for $55 million? Way to help minorities get into these teaching spaces, because that's what the WEA is holding it up as. Not some critical, we need to get these people through this training program, anyone who's qualified, black, white, green, whatever it is. This is a DEI initiative, but it's even more than that. It's even more sinister than that. And you don't have to take my word for it. Going back to that Education Week article that aired in May of last year, they interviewed a guy named Bradley Mironano. He's an associate professor of education policy and leadership at the University of Nevada. He said, unions have been trying to find ways to engage members and to innovate, and I think this is a natural avenue to pursue. He expects to see more state teachers' unions adapt the residency model, either by themselves or with a university partner. After all, it says, this can double as an organizing strategy at a time when teachers' unions have been hit with legal and legislative challenges to how they recruit and retain members, he said. Quote, they are in front of these new teachers and they can pitch the benefits of the union. So now we, you, taxpayers, are essentially footing the bill for a WEA DEI effort that's really just a recruiting tool in disguise. So they can recruit new and lifelong members of the Washington Education Association who will pay them dues for years to come, and so that they can train them on the taxpayer dime in the image of the WEA, which, as we know, is a failed entity that is training failed teachers and sending failed educators into our education system to fail kids. Test scores in the toilet across the board, enrollment down because of the political and social indoctrination, academic success at all-time lows, spending on education at all-time highs, obsession with social and political indoctrination and DEI at all-time highs. And again, I would bring all of this back to the reason it was problematic when we thought it was only $8.6 million. And that is because the Washington Education Association is nothing more than a political arm of the Democratic Party. They have donated, you name the Democratic politician in our state, they have donated to them $250,000 to the Washington State Democratic Committee, $250,000 to the Democratic Governors Association. You name the Democratic legislator who will have to consider this budget request, they've given them money. Not to mention maxing out to the Friends of Chris Rakedahl Political Action Committee. And one more thing I want to point out. This wasn't some sort of bid process where the state said, hey, let's find out the entity that would be best suited to start these cohorts, to train these future teachers. Let's figure out who can do it the best, who can do it quickly, who can get the most people through and certified and into our classrooms. And God forbid, let's see who could do it at the best cost. That was never it. Because again, if we go back to that Education Week article, where they admit that Chris Rakedahl asked the Washington Education Association to do this directly. he knew the entire time that that's who he wanted to run this program. It says, a couple years ago, Washington state schools began relying on record-breaking numbers of emergency substitutes who aren't required to have a background in education or bachelor's degree. The pattern was one of the health indicators that our system is struggling in terms of educator shortages, said Jim Meadows, the Dean of Educator Career Pathways at the WEA. Chris Reykdal, the state superintendent of public instruction, asked WEA to develop training and support for the emergency substitutes and create a pathway for teacher certification. And now it's full circle. So Chris Reykdal, funded by the Washington Education Association in his political campaigns, specifically asked the Washington Education Association to create a program so he could give them federal funds for it, so he could go back now to the tune of more than $70 million and continue to reach into the pockets of taxpayers to give his cronies and allies at the teachers union tens of millions of dollars to run a program that has only so far, according to OSPI, put through 12 or so teachers. If you don't see that as being corrupt, if you don't see that as something being worthy of criticism and scrutiny from the legacy media, I can't help you. But again, none of that is known without citizen sleuths. None of that is known without people digging into the state budget and doing the work that the media has refused to do. And $50 million of this is still up in the air. It's not too late to have a pressure campaign to put an end to it. And there's a million reasons that you don't have to tie any political motivation to justify putting an end to it. You don't have to believe what I believe, that the WEA shouldn't get a dime of taxpayer money because they're a political entity that turns around and uses that money to fund Democratic politicians. And that it would never be allowed if it was Republicans in control in Olympia who were funneling tens of millions of dollars to their political cronies and allies who turned around and wrote max checks to their campaigns. It would never be allowed. It would never be tolerated. The media would talk about it. And the media's coverage would put an end to it. So you don't have to believe what I believe, that the Washington Education Association is the most powerful entity in the state, failing our kids, getting propped up financially. You don't have to believe that. But at the very least, in a budget situation like the one that we're in, something that started with one-time COVID funds, that was clearly a mistake, clearly a fiscal mistake, to say don't fund an ongoing need with one-time funds. Now is the time to put an end to it. It was a one-time fund, never should have been spent. We've already now given at least $30 million to it. Let's not give them $50 million more. At the very least, that is the baseline, nonpartisan argument for putting an end to it. And then, of course, there's the argument that they have not proven that the program can justify a $50 million spend. They've only put through 12 people, according to OSPI. In what mathematical sense? Nicole, can you do the math for me quick? 30 million divided by 12. I'm not going to pretend I know the math. What is it?
$250,000.
$250,000 per person to give them like some Zoom training. And now you want $50 million more, and you're saying that you can put through 100 people a year. I call bullshit. This is insane stuff. It's insane. It's corruption. I don't know what it's going to take to put an end to it, but I think exposing it is a good first step.